Calaroga Shark Media.
Hello, I'm Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. John Mulaney told GQ, I can really be set in my ways in some ways, but I'm very good at major transformations. At Georgetown, he joined an improv group with Nick Kroll and Mike Birbiglia, but said, I had erratic work habits. I was very disorganized. In a sense, I was always ambitious, but I wasn't like, I'm going to direct every play in high school. I wasn't all over it in any way. He got to New York at age 23 and said, I hit the ground running. It was all of a sudden this total focus and drive to do as much stand-up as possible. I didn't drink alcohol anymore. I didn't take any drugs. I was just totally dedicated to one thing, kind of monastically, and it was awesome. GQ analyzed his style, and they nailed it here. They wrote, he's expert at landing an audience deep into the thicket of a joke setup and then pausing just long enough to allow them to arrive at the punchline right before he does. When it works best, a single word detonates like a bomb. Seth Meyers says, he presents to the audience, I'm in control. I'm not particularly interested in which of these jokes you like and which you don't. No matter what happens, I'm going to be having a very good time. Jim Jefferies told Review.com, when I moved over to America, there was this sort of myth that I was only funny because I said the C word and because of my accent. But I sold more tickets in Australia where they weren't fascinated by my accent in the slightest. So it's just good to see you can entertain people all over the world. It used to be you had to go to a country several times to try and break a country. When I came to America, arguably, there'd only been a handful of comedians from overseas that ever broke America before that. Now you know about a whole heap of different comics from all over the world because you've seen their specials. I'm not on TikTok, so I'm a bit of a dinosaur in that regard. I don't think my comedy plays out well on TikTok. I think part of the problem with TikTok is that we're seeing comedy in short form. Amen. So the long-winded stories are the things that loop around and the callbacks and the shows being a show, we're sort of losing that nuance. Yep. In the same way that people don't listen to albums anymore. They're just listening to individual songs. They don't listen to albums as they're meant to be played out, as the artist set it up to be heard, and I think that sort of happened to comedy as well. Yep, high five standing O for me on that comment. Crack.com asked Anthony Jeselnik about being an actor. He said, I would enjoy it because I enjoy the camaraderie. Stand-up's all on your own. With acting, you're working with people. I like that. I'm just not asked to do it very often, and frankly, I'm surprised I'm not asked. I'm a good-looking guy. I have a very distinctive voice that I think they would use me in voice stuff, but I think at some point, people will start asking me. But I'm spoiled as a comic. I see comics who are making huge movies, and I talk to them afterwards, and they're like, I lost money. If I just toured the whole time I was doing this movie, I would have done much better. It's not something that I feel like I'm missing out on, and I'm not that good. The interesting characters I wouldn't be able to play. I'd be thinking, oh, someone else should be doing this, and that's a bad thing for an actor to be thinking. Cracked asked about Anthony's current hairstyle. Crack's observation, the older, spikier haircut seemed more in keeping with a villain. Now, your hair's a little softer, not as threatening. I assume you think about how the character looks on stage? What prompted the change? Jeselnik said, it's something I don't think about on stage, but it was something that I became very aware of after the last special when there was this huge debate about beard versus non-beard, and which is better for the character. The character seems more like a psychopath, clean-shaven, but I'm like, no, I like the beard. I decided to grow my hair a little bit longer on tour. I just thought, what would this do? Does this make me more of an a-hole or less of an a-hole? And let's be honest, I think having more of a styled haircut seems a little bit scarier. This is fascinating. It's more like we're putting on a show, whereas the spiky haircut was easy to do. Anyone could do that. It just seemed like I'm walking out here doing this. I feel like I've gotten more famous in the past couple of years because of clips, and the clips are short hair. With longer hair, he feels he can be a little more anonymous in public. Preacher Lawson has been out on the road doing the Funny as Bleep tour. And that's not me bleeping it. That's the name of the tour. Preacher said, I was very quiet unless everybody in the class was quiet. Then I was like, all right, some people just really want attention. First off, everyone does. Let's just put that out there. No one wants to be ignored, but some people just wanted a little more. His tips for comedians, get on stage immediately and just do comedy a lot. I think humor is like athleticism. Some people are born a little more athletic than other people. Then there's some people that are just born a little funnier, but I don't care how athletic you are. You still have to learn how to shoot a basketball or dribble. You need to learn technique. For comedy, write every day like it's your morning coffee. You should do it anyway for your mental health. It's not supposed to be fun. It's a job. You're not supposed to like jobs because they're working, and that's the trade-off. Lawson says, I think I have the perfect amount of fame where if I go outside, there's people that recognize me, but it's not like, I just want to eat with my family. I don't like when people take pictures or videos of me without my permission. I think that feels uncomfortable. It's like, I never said I wanted to be recorded. As for controversial topics, Lawson says, anyone's going to get upset, but if it's a large group of people that are upset, I think it's usually because the comedian did a bad job of conveying the joke. Comedians, we're just storytellers. We're the same as you when you go to the movies. You lose yourself for an hour and 30 minutes. You know, you'd leave the theater feeling refreshed, like, that was a good time. If you go to the movie theater and you don't like the movie, you probably should have looked up the director. There's this narrative that you shouldn't apologize, which I think is stupid. I think there are times when the comedian should apologize, and then they don't do it because they're like, no, I'm a comedian. And it's like, no, actually, you should apologize. But he adds, I really believe anyone can talk about anything, but sometimes we say dumb things, like, my bad, that was dumb. Sarah Silverman says, I don't really come from a place of fear that I'm going to get canceled. I talk about stuff that I think is important or funny. I'm never looking to upset people or offend people. Comedy's not evergreen. If you're a comedian, you look at things you did 10 years ago and don't cringe, you're not growing. Ideally, you're growing and changing and can't relate to the person you were. People get mad at me because I've apologized for things in the past. I think it's important to apologize when you're sorry and not apologize when you're not sorry. Everybody wins. Friend of the show, Gianmarco Cerezi, is on Vulture's list of the comedians you should know and will know. They asked him, if you were immortalized as a cartoon character, what would your outfit be? A very Gianmarco answer, 5-inch shorts, a t-shirt I got on Etsy for a High School Musical production that I wasn't in. That's also a little too short. A jean jacket that doesn't really make sense given the shorts, and high-top Nikes where one of the colors matches the color of the shirt's text. Let's also throw in a thin gold forever bracelet with a T-charm that I got my girlfriend at a casino's tattoo convention, some Warby Parker glasses, and a brown leather watch, the two hands of which read Memento and Maury. Which musical? Nobody asked. Ideally, it would be Falsettos, Company, or Wild Party, just to be pretentious. Also, if I'm thinking about this as a cartoon for a wide audience, I'd probably go with Phantom of the Opera, even though I've never been much of an Andrew Lloyd Webber stan. Proudest achievement of your career so far? My JFL New Faces set is probably the only important set I've ever done that I wouldn't do over. I was at that show. He crushed. He was the best of the night. I wrote that down. I told you about it on the podcast the next day. I've told that to his face. That was a great set. He said, generally, I found all these career milestones are fraught and stressful and imperfect, so in terms of feeling proud, they pale in comparison to a new joke working, or even better, an old joke finally working. I did a pilot last year for a roast-based panel show hosted by Anthony Jeselnik. Interesting. And he anonymously mentioned me on his podcast the next week. I know this because I've been listening to that podcast to fall asleep to for years. I was already asleep, but my girlfriend heard it, shook me awake, and was like, go back, go back. That was pretty cool. I've been procrastinating filming an hour. Which comedian's career would you like to follow? John Mulaney, but just in terms of his personal life. His favorite worst show was getting hired to feature in a corporate gig in Santa Barbara. I think I was getting paid $4,500 to do 25 minutes, which was hands down the most I'd ever made off a night of comedy. My mom drove me to the casino from LA, and on the drive, I looked up what company I was performing for. What I learned was it was less of a company and more of a union of sorts for West Coast electrical companies with a very intense ideological bent. Their newsletter had articles like, has wokeness ruined travel? And COVID, climate change, and other lies Democrats want you to believe. I wish I could tell you I thought about not going through with the gig, but it would be a lie. $4,500. When I got there, my mom and I found ourselves surrounded by mostly men in their 60s, thousands, all wearing full cowboy garb without looking like they'd ever been on a horse. I met the other comedian, a kind and talented comic who nevertheless sold merch shirts that said, "Who done farted?" I wonder who that was. Gianmarco said the comedy show started as all comedy shows should, with the singing of the national anthem, then the auction, of course, which consisted of small guns that were intended for warfare, training packages, and, 5 friends to learn how to use those guns before, or hopefully not, after a wine tasting. Right as they were wrapping up the auction with the AK-47s, I looked through the playbill to ensure there wasn't going to be some kind of cross-burning at the end, and that's when I saw the part with my name, which stipulated in big bold letters that the comedy portion of the evening was only possible thanks to a generous donation by ExxonMobil, the evil company. I started freaking out, thinking stupid comedian thoughts like, what would George Carlin do? But I didn't have any cocaine, so I tried to think of a joke that would in some way absolve me of the sin. So I got on stage and proceeded to bomb for 23 minutes. I wish I could say that was on purpose to spite the crowd, but it was more a mix of my lack of practice sticking to clean jokes, plus second-guessing jokes in the moment that I figured wouldn't play well with men old enough to have served in the Confederacy. Then with 2 minutes left and no momentum to speak of, I went for it. At the time, I was closing with a joke about Titanic 2, a recreation of the Titanic built by some billionaire who hopefully was on the recent submarine trip. Yikes. Normally, I'd note that Titanic's voyage was much safer nowadays thanks to global warming, but this time I said it was because the icebergs got a lot smaller thanks to my sponsor, ExxonMobil. Wasn't a boo right away. First was just noise, a unified, confused groan, but then one old man was able to close his mouth long enough to produce a bee. I wouldn't say it was like an Apollo-level boo. It was nothing like the Apollo in more ways than one, but it was my first real boo. And whenever I have an extremely crappy gig now, I try to remind myself it's worth it for the story. That is amazing. And that is your comedy news for today. If you enjoy the program, tell a friend about it, and hopefully they'll enjoy it too. And you can both hit that plus sign on the app there and follow the podcast. If you'd like the show without commercial interruption, if you're on Apple Podcasts, click that banner there. There's a 30-day free trial of that. And if not, And if you're not on Apple Podcasts, check the link in the show notes. You can get it commercial free. This show and 20 plus others, including 5 Good News Stories, which I host. See you tomorrow.